everyone, Alexa Donne here, and today I'm here to shout a bit about how new adult is not a thing. ... in traditional publishing. It's not a thing. Stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not gonna happen, Gretchen Wieners. We love a good Mean Girls joke, but seriously, so I see this all the time over and over and over and over and over again, and I think it's only fair to those of you trying to pursue traditional publishing who want to understand traditional publishing to have this drilled into your head, and that is, seriously, new adult is not a thing. There is a disconnect in the writing and publishing communities because new adult is a thing in self-publishing, but it is not in traditional publishing. Basically, about 6 or 8 years ago, this category popped up and started picking up steam in self-publishing, essentially new adult, next level after YA, usually set in college, where the kind of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, so to speak, are the dial turned up a bit higher. So it's characters going to college or whatnot, having their first sexual experiences, usually. And to that end, this is also me pointing out to you, in self-publishing and in traditional publishing, new adult is a romance category. This is another area where I think a ton of confusion happens. If you have a fantasy book or a sci-fi book or a mystery book, what have you, where the character is 22, congratulations, you've written an adult novel. It's not new adult. It's very important for you to remember that categories and genres are marketing terms, and from a marketing perspective in terms of how it behaves in the market, new adult is a romance category. Really, with how romance has actually shifted on both sides of the market, you don't even really need it as a separate category in indie publishing either. It's just romance, because romance can have younger protagonists, but regardless, that is how it functions in the marketplace. New adult equals romance. It's basically YA in college with sex. Explicit sex. Yes, we're going to talk about Sarah J. Maas, because yes, it is very, very confusing how YA crossover exists. But okay, we're going to talk about new adult and traditional publishing. Do you know why new adult is not a thing in traditional publishing? Because it simply never took off. They did try. Essentially, the problem that happened with new adult and traditional publishing, remembering that it is basically a romance category, really what new adult functioned as is a return to chick lit, but with much younger protagonists. And what ended up happening, I think for the better, is instead of becoming its own standalone category that has a place in the bookstore, which is a very important thing to remember, there is no new adult section in Barnes & Noble, thus it does not exist in traditional publishing. What happened instead was a resurgence of a certain kind of rom-com in the romance category that expanded to include younger protagonists, essentially young adults going through things for the first time. They were absorbed up into romance. So books like The Hating Game or The Kiss Quotient are just published as adult romance novels, whereas if they had been self-published, they might have been self-published as new adult. Does that make sense? Essentially, new adult failed to take off in traditional publishing, thus agents aren't going to take on new adult work. They're going to tell you it's either a YA or it's adult. You have to pick one and go in either direction, because there are tweaks that have to be made to fit in either category. But, okay, we are going to talk about YA crossover, which is definitely here to confuse you. So what ended up happening essentially in traditional publishing as a response to trying to make new adult happen, and it didn't happen, it split. In the one direction, we have romance expanding and returning back to the traditions of chick lit. Not a very flattering word for it, but I always liked chick lit novels, so I'm glad that new adult brought it back and expanded it. I like their fun rom-com romance books with younger protagonists now. So that's on one end. On the other end was, it's technically what the intention of new adult was, but it's almost like a perversion of it. And yes, it's confusing and it's very, very case by case. And that is the elusive YA crossover novel. We are seeing more and more YA crossover novels, so essentially YA books that are really, really high on the end of older protagonists, more mature themes, and in some cases, books that are literally set in college. But the difference between those few titles that are set in college but are still bought and marketed as YA titles and new adult as new adult does and did exist is you are not going to get those steamy sex scenes. You don't get to revolve your entire plot around sex in the same way sex can be in YA books, but the way that it's handled is super different from new adult or traditional romance. And so this is what I mean, that if you have a new adult novel and you want to go traditional publishing, you have to pick one direction, and And if you pick YA, you are going to have to make modifications if your book is really sexy. Modifications you might not have to make if you go in the adult romance direction. So, YA crossover. It all started with someone called Sarah J. Maas. And this is the one that has frustrated me for years and still frustrates me so much because it is the exception that so many people speak to say, well, she did it, so I can do it. That book is kind of an outlier, but then we have Serpent and Dove, which built on this outlier trend, or even, there's so many things we can say about Six of Crows, where those characters might technically be teenagers, but they're written like full-ass adults. I mean, that's a whole separate conversation about some of the weirdness of the upper ends of YA right now. But A Court of Thorns and Roses, at the time that it was published, definitely the most sexually explicit YA book that I had seen at the time and really have seen. It remains one of the most sexually explicit YA books, and it created this kind of schism in YA that is interesting to talk about because you basically have a YA series that you cannot rec or give to actual young adults, actual young teens, because their parents might murder you. Or not all young teens are ready for that kind of sexual content. Some are, and bully for them because they get to pick it up from the YA section and their parents will never know. But the point is that is the first book that really pushed the upper limits of YA in terms of sexual content. But again, you know how I told you that new adult, if it's fantasy, that it's not new adult, it's basically just an adult fantasy novel? Still true, really, I think that whole series should be adults, but the new cover redesigns actually agree with me. Point is, response to new adult. We did get a series of books that are set at college. Great examples that, again, people trot out all the time would be Fangirl, American Panda is another one. Though both of those still feel pretty pure YA and actually have things baked into their premises that make their characters feel more like a pure teen than a slightly older teen doing adult things, which is I think why they got away with them. But I've also seen a couple more college age deals come through more recently. But essentially that has been the response to new adult in traditional publishing. You either go full romance or you do your YA with modifications. So what do you do if you have a new adult book? Well, if it is actually new adult, remember, repeat to yourself, it's going to be a romance, because if it's fantasy, sci-fi, or anything else, it's just an adult novel. Congratulations, you wrote an adult book. And those categories and genres do support books with younger protagonists. That doesn't make them YA, they're adult. But what do? Well, you can self-publish. It's a category that thrives in self-publishing. But if you want to be traditionally published, as I mentioned, you gotta make a choice. You gotta go YA or you gotta go adult, which means you need to be reading either or of those categories to really understand the book that you have written and then move forward from that point. Don't query agents with new adult because it is not a thing in traditional publishing. You gotta go either or. But like I said, you could call it YA crossover, but you have to actually understand what a YA crossover is. You should be reading YA crossover books to kind of pinpoint how they are sitting in the market. I should probably make a whole video about YA crossovers. So that's it. That's my rant about how new adult is not a thing. Could it change? I don't see it changing, but sure. I honestly think traditional publishing has decided what it is. It's the either and the or, and they're gonna dig in and continue to do that. So it's just a matter of understanding the market, reading in the market, and as I said, if you have a pure new adult title, self-publish it. They do well in that space. So that's really it. I'm prepared for a lot of you to disagree with me, but I said what I said. So let me know down below in the comments, what do you think about this? Stop trying to make that happen. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it. I will make a lot of these kind of real talk about traditional publishing videos, throwing some shade about things, and if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, guys, happy writing.